Southern African Parliamentary Support Trust promotes civic and public participation in parliament business in Zimbabwe and across the SADC region. SAP's quest is to strengthen parliaments to become truly central institutions in a democracy. The work of parliaments should promote good governance, that is, how public institutions conduct public affairs and manage resources in order to guarantee the realization of human rights. A strong parliament will promote representative democracy. For more information on the Southern African Parliamentary Support Trust, visit www.sapst.org.
Ask the MP. The Right Honourable is in the hot seat. Ask the MP with Farai on CFM Stereo.
ZFM Stereo, my station, your station. Thank you so much for tuning in and choosing us this Tuesday evening. It's just gone a minute after 7:31, 29 minutes to 8. And at this time on the station, we bring you an effort that we call Ask the MP. It is an interactive program where we bring in different members of parliament to speak to you, to engage on topics and issues that have been discussed, and give you an opportunity to call in, to send your WhatsApp messages through, to comment, to contribute, and to ask questions. And I do encourage you, from wherever you are, even if you're not here in Zimbabwe, because many of you are tuning in live on various platforms, do get in touch with us and interact with us. Our call-in number, 0772-168-045. 0772-168-045. That'll be our call-in number. Please get in touch with us and tell us where you're calling from and give us your contribution. But if you want to get in touch via WhatsApp, as many of you do, 0731-168-045. 0731-168-045. We do encourage you to like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter, where you can also catch up and participate in these discussions and get in touch with us. So tonight we have three guests in the studio. Two of them are MPs. We're talking about the issue of the ongoing BVR, biometric voter registration process. And I encourage you, if you haven't registered to vote and you're eligible, please do so. Go and register to vote. But tonight we're talking about the BVR process, and in particular issues that we've been hearing around intimidation around that entire process. Now, in the studio tonight, I have Honorable Psychology Maziwisa. He is the legislator for Highfield, representing the ruling ZANU PF. Honorable, great to have you on the program.
Thanks so much indeed for having me here tonight.
Honorable Webster Maondera is from the MDCT. He is the MP for Glenora. Honorable Maondera, great to have you on the program.
Thank you, Farai. Good evening, listeners.
Last but certainly not least, Tawanda Chimini is the director of the Elections Resource Center. Sir, great to have you on the program. Thank you for joining us.
Good evening.
A bit of background before we get into the discussion tonight. Last week, Parliament discussed the issue of traditional leaders and individuals intimidating voters by demanding to see and recording serial numbers of their voter registration slips. Members also demanded that Minister of Justice Honorable Ziyambi put an end to this menace, which they claimed intimidated voters into voting for particular parties. This has indeed caused an uproar in the country, as citizens also demanded transparency in the voter registration process and that the culprits be brought to book. The Zimbabwe Electoral Commission has since issued a stern warning to people going about demanding voter registration slips and serial numbers from members of the public, saying the move is not only an offense but bordered on voter intimidation. In this program, we interrogated this challenge in line with our electoral system and the measures that can be taken to address the issue as we're going towards an election. I introduced my panel a bit earlier. Very quickly, let me ask Tawanda, let me ask you to come through here. Unfortunately, we are coming from a history in this country of intimidation. For many people, elections mean intimidation. It means it's now time to scare the other side. It's now time to be violent and attack the other side, whoever it is. And this is across the political divide. Can this really ever end? And perhaps the question I have to you is, if we had not seen, because I did see some of these things on social media being distributed via WhatsApp, if we're not seeing that footage, would this, have been checked or even come to light? Perhaps it's still even happening. We don't know. But how best do we address? Can we ever get over this history that we have of associating elections with, it's all or nothing, and so we must intimidate the other side. We must perhaps even attack and beat the other side.
Part of the problem, or if I may say, like you've pointed out, part of the challenge with our previous elections these allegations of intimidation and violence against opponents in an election contest. And I'm glad we have two colleagues from different political parties here today, and I hope we can debate this issue. So in terms of how we best address this, at a starting point, I think you need to have the necessary political will to deal with it. So even where laws are weak, the premise of fixing any of these challenges is political. So we must walk the talk. If we are sincere, and we've heard the president say this, that we want free and fair election, the anticipation, the expectation, Farai, is that everything is done to address all elements that could possibly, and I'm not saying that will, but that will possibly affect the freeness and fairness of our elections. So if we are sincere about it, the entire infrastructure of the current administration must invest in itself in ensuring that at a political level, at a starting point, we begin to address this. Who is doing it? Why are they doing it? Are the authorities that have the responsibility of maintaining law and order working to deal with this? Because when you talk about a lot of the elements that allude to intimidation, it's criminal behavior. It's against the law. It's in effect a violation. If anybody intimidates anyone, and our law has become so progressive, even if you do it on WhatsApp, you're in trouble.
But let me ask you this. Are we aware of these offenses? And I say, because of the electoral laws, are people actually aware that
it's an offense?
That it's an offense, that if someone comes and demands this, well, we've been told now, but prior to this, and has this message reached everyone who should receive it?
The bad part, Farai, is that when a practice becomes so permanent, it is naturalized. So in a lot of communities, people think it's normal for someone to ask for these details. People think it's normal to be threatened, to be intimidated around certain elements relating to political life, because it has happened so often. And it's a culture that we have allowed to happen because of the impunity associated with this practice having happened. So if we're to deal with it, and you ask the question, is this coming out? Where we have gone as an NGO to interact with communities, to talk about what they can anticipate ahead of elections, a lot of information has been coming out. We have an entire community that has signed 25 affidavits confirming that a particular individual came to their homes, knocked on their doors, and demanded these registration slips, serial numbers. We have raised this matter with the Election Commission because, in our view, it is a direct violation of the Electoral Act. There is intimidation associated with it. So fair and fine, political parties can say that they want to collect these details because they want to understand if their own supporters have registered to vote or not. But number one, the vote must be secret in terms of the constitution. So perceived or otherwise, if someone asks me for specific details, that may, in my own view, compromise the secrecy of my ballot. That in itself has a bearing on my capacity to express myself at the ballot freely.
Indeed.
Right. Secondly, if someone then threatens me if I refuse to give the serial number, either threatens me by saying that we will deal with you, or threatens me by saying that we will withdraw certain things from you, that in itself is intimidation. So if the request for these serial numbers is associated with behavior that is in direct contravention of the Electoral Act, it is illegal. So it must be stopped. So the expectation is that the Election Commission, as a starting point, must take action on this. In fact, we have argued to say where this intimidation has been recorded, voter registration must stop until people are able to freely participate in the electoral process without fearing that someone is going to come and ask for my personal details.
Indeed. Let me bring you in, Honorable Mwakutuya. In your own constituency, your own observations, how is BVR going? Not necessarily focusing on the issue of intimidation, but just in general. Is there an awareness of what this is, and indeed of the rights and the laws surrounding elections and this entire registration process?
I think there is widespread understanding within the constituency that this is an opportunity that's been given in terms of the constitution to every constituent member in Highfield West to register as a registered voter in anticipation of the forthcoming elections. That understanding is there. But I think it would be unfair for me to avoid commenting on a question that you asked earlier on around intimidation. I think the allegations that are emerging or that have emerged in the last few days are very concerning and worrying allegations. They are worrying because I think they have the potential to taint the legitimacy of an election that all of us are looking forward to, an election that all of us believe has the potential and capability of reuniting Zimbabwe as a country with the international community. The idea, I think, by certain people who belong to this school of thought that says that to acquire a political office, one must intimidate people, you must coerce people. I think that culture belongs really in the past. We now have a new dispensation, and we have a president who has been very consistent about the need to have elections that are free, fair, credible, and free of any blemishes. It is important, I think, for everyone to buy into that vision, for purposes, I think, of making sure that the investment that we want, that we're expecting, that the president has really been championing over the last few weeks, really becomes a reality. So it's important, I think, for everybody to change and to have a new perspective and to buy into the vision of the president and to do things differently. It's also important, I think, having said that, I think to also, this is a message, of course, that goes to the general citizen, but I think it's a message that must also go to all political parties, particularly, I think, to opposition political parties. The one thing I think that people need to understand is when you're forming a political party, there's an underlying legitimate natural expectation that you are acting or you seek to act in the national interest. Mm-hmm. Why am I raising this? It is natural for opposition political parties to oppose. That's fine. That's fair and fine. And we need opposition parties in the country for purposes of having a healthy democracy. But I think we must also be very careful that in our endeavor to oppose, in our endeavor to enrich our democracy, we must not have people who just, raise issues, unsubstantiated sometimes, for purposes of advancing a certain political agenda. That is very dangerous. Mm-hmm. It's dangerous because it impedes in our efforts, I think, especially in what the president is trying to do. He's now, trying to create an environment of tolerance, an environment of inclusivity, an environment really that ensures that we have an election that is credible, that lures ultimately investment into the country. But if we're going to be petty and immature, forgetting that you will never find a perfect electoral political environment anywhere in the world. Let's judge our political environment objectively. Let us look at the circumstances surrounding us, and let's consider whether the government, whether the political will that Comrade Jimini was talking about is present. What is government doing? Are there efforts, physical, tangible efforts, to try and make sure that we have an election that is free and fair? And I think that if you look at the utterances of the president, if you look at what is obtaining on the ground now, there's only one indication, one conclusion that can emanate from that, and that is that the political will to make sure that we have an election that is free and fair is there.
I know, Honorable Mawandere, you are itching to say something, but before you do, I just want to pose another question to you, Honorable Mazivisa. Indeed, the President has spoken of delivering free and fair elections, but is it enough to just say it? Is it? Yes, he has said it, and again, I asked the same question I'd asked, Tawanda, about whether these messages are going to where to the most remote areas. Yes, we've heard it in the urban areas because we watch it on TV, we read it in the papers, but out there, the people who have traditionally engaged in these acts of intimidation and violence, have they heard this? Do they believe it? Do they buy into it?
Look, the president is not just saying things. He's doing things. He's acting on his utterances. And why am I saying this? He has had a series of meetings with the leadership of ZANU-PF, condemning violence. He's had a series of meetings, even with the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission, through, of course, the Ministry of Justice, Legal and Parliamentary Affairs, to say it was important for you from the onset to make sure that you have voter education that goes right to the grassroots. I think part of the problem that we are having is that there wasn't that widespread voter education. You alluded to the fact that I think you asked a very important question earlier on. Are people aware that what they're doing is illegitimate, is unlawful, is criminal? And that question really would have been answered by a proper, thorough voter education process. Because you get the tendency, I think, the feeling that from where I'm sitting, that there are people who are doing this completely oblivious of the fact that what they're doing is unlawful. They genuinely believe that what they are doing, whoever they are, what they are doing is within the ambit of the law. So it goes back to
business as usual.
It goes back to voter education. So it's regrettable, and it's vitally important. I think that all of us as citizens, as the people of Zimbabwe, must buy into the new dispensation. They are thinking, the thrust of the president, and make sure that we don't damage the legitimacy of the next election.
Honorable Mandela, I'm going to ask you to respond to some of the issues that have been raised, but I think more important, let's start from that point of view. That do you genuinely believe that there is a willingness to deliver a free and fair election? We've heard it in word, and do you think the deeds will follow?
I don't think there's this political will to deliver a free, fair, and credible election. Why I'm saying so, Farai, is when this issue was raised in Parliament last week by Honorable Mnengami, our colleagues from ZANU-PF, the way they reacted, they didn't even want Mnengami to say it in Parliament, and we were vindicated that these guys are indicating left and turning right. They know what's happening on the ground, but when they're talking to the public like this, they pretend everything's normal. So there's no will at all. Why I'm saying so? This intimidation, where people are being asked to submit their slips, is happening countrywide, and no single person has been arrested. If the ruling party, which is ZANU-PF, is genuine and sincere, by now we should be hearing cases of people who have been arrested and brought to court, being charged with the Electoral Act for violating the law. But no one has been arrested. Instead, after we talked about it in Parliament last week, it's actually intensifying. In my constituency today, I got reports that in Glenora C, there's some people who are moving door to door. And I've told residents that they should resist them. If they pester them, they should effect citizens' arrest, or they should go and report to the police.
Honorable Mandela, let me ask you this, and in no way am I saying or trying to undermine what you're saying, but how do we move beyond, or how do we prove that you could actually just come here and say, residents are being asked to do this? Why aren't they saying Mwakutuya, their name is whatever, and they've asked me? So we have that hard evidence. I'm not saying that you're not being truthful, but how do you defend yourself from Honorable Maziwisa saying there goes the opposition again trying to undermine?
We've got Tawanda here from ERC. He's got affidavits of people who have signed affirming that they've been forced to submit their serial numbers from the voter slip. So what evidence do you need? Then we have got audio evidence. For example, Mutasa Central, where there's Honorable Sarawaka. There's a certain village head who was asked by the chief to bring to take these slips from the people so that they would take the registration serial numbers. So what evidence do you need? There's empirical and overwhelming evidence to that effect, and we even volunteered to submit it in Parliament, and the speaker, maybe because of time or something, he could not take it. But I can assure you, when we resume sitting next week, but we are prepared to give that evidence in pictures, audio, even video evidence is there, including the affidavits that we have had ERSA saying they got.
Tawanda, where would this evidence is this evidence admissible? Are people able to take this evidence to ZRP, for instance? Who would they go to say, look, this is what's happened to me, this is the person? Where do they go with that?
The reports must be filed with the police. Mm-hmm. And what we're encouraging, we're running a call center where we are picking up information relating to anything pertaining to elections. It's a public call center. You can find it on our social media pages, and people are calling in. So we've started to encourage all those reporting these incidences to report to the police, and then matters are taken up. So in one instance, we've actually had lawyers go and assist one complainant who is now finding it difficult to stay in their own community in Mashonaland East, and they are seeking refuge outside Mashonaland East. And we had to get a lawyer to accompany them to make a formal police report, because it's necessary that we report to the police, and we begin to then hold state institutions accountable. I agree with what Honorable Maziwisa has said. It's unfortunate that some of these actions are, by and large, undermining the credibility of our future election. So never mind what happens on polling day, Farai. If polling day is going to be as peaceful as ever, You can't argue to say our elections were credible, peaceful, free and fair. When you do an assessment of an election, you include the quality of the processes leading up to the election process, including the environment. So let's take it to a practical level. We've got these complaints coming up, right? What is it that can be done? You see, we have a code of conduct for political parties, which is part of the Electoral Act. And the code of conduct of for political parties binds not only the individual supporters of a political party. So if a supporter of a political party actions are inconsistent with the provisions of the Electoral Act, not only is that individual liable, but the party itself is also liable. And I'm saying it to my colleagues from the political parties to say, look, where this has happened, I know when political parties want to have rallies anyway, or they want to communicate with their structures, a message is sent from Harare and it reaches the structures. And I'm saying it to both political parties. I know that's what happens. So it is possible for political parties, all political parties, to give that instruction to say that which has been reportedly happening, we're not saying which party has been doing it, is illegal and must stop forthwith. Otherwise, if it continues, the allegation would be that either the party structures or the institutions doing this are in direct defiance of the president. Because the president has made it clear. And whatever the president says, the expectation is that every infrastructure of the parties and of government
must
take it up. And if they don't, it is in direct defiance of the president, and there must be consequences.
True.
And now, if at a very practical level, you can look at how these things can be moved. Hence my insistence in my opening remarks to say that it comes down to the political will of the political actors. They have to have the political will to operationalize this.
Before you come in, Honorable Mawandela, let me read a couple of messages coming through, and we do encourage our listeners. 0731 168 045 WhatsApp number. Also get in touch with us on our call-in number 0772 168 045. Baba Lawrence in Budiriro says the president can go on and preach peace, but in the rural areas, those headmen will continue forcing people to vote for ZANU-PF. We're reading these as they come through. And I saw people. This one's directed to you, Honorable Mazwisa. I saw people demanding serial numbers at Geneva flats, being threatened. If you don't give us, you'll be evicted from your house. I think Honorable Mazwisa knows this. It's also happening in Canaan, in his own constituency. Here's another one saying, I think ZEC has to go further than just a circular. The culprits are known. All they need to do is go Muvanwe and show them the culprits. This is Babati Meka and Ichinoi. Thank you so much for that contribution. Another one getting through from Kwamtsago in Bocha says, guys are being intimidated on a daily basis here. Serial number is being taken and they are given 50 kgs of maize. This is not free and fair. I then went back to that listener and asked who is taking these and asking for these numbers. They've now given me some names, so hopefully we can forward them to ZEC and some action can be taken there. Very lastly, before I hand back to the MPs, there's one here which we got quite early in the program saying apana munhu ari kutyiswa tiri kungotya tega ndo zviri matiri. So which is quite worrying because that just says that people are not going to express themselves because they don't even need to be intimidated. It's already in them. Honorable Mazwisa, I'll allow you to respond to some of those, then I'll come to you.
Yeah, look, firstly, I'm not aware of any intimidation in Highfield West, in Geneva or in New Canaan. To be absolutely honest with you, I have no knowledge of that. However, if those activities are going on, I think they are regrettable. They have to stop. They are criminal. We don't condone that. As their MP, I certainly do not condone that. Certainly as a member of ZANU-PF, a party where President Mnangagwa comes from, I definitely would not support that. But look, there's one point I want to keep emphasizing, guys, and that is that we're talking of elections. And please, guys, whoever is listening and together with my panelists here, let's always, whenever we're debating issues around elections, let's be open-minded. Let's never, ever think that we can create conditions that are perfect for our electoral systems to function. It's not possible. Of course, we can aspire for that to happen, and there's a lot that's happening on the ground to make sure that we have an election that is perfect. But perfection is very difficult to attain.
Totally agreed.
You're sounding as if you're already making an excuse
it's
for something
not
that may not be.
It's not an excuse. I want people to look at this in context. There are countries, look, we are complaining and it's unlawful and it's not right. And I've said it in my opening remarks that it's regrettable, it is inconsistent with the vision of the president. It should stop. But look, we are complaining that people are having their sleeps taken. There are jurisdictions and countries where people's heads are being taken for political purposes. It's not right. But we've got to look at things progressively and objectively and say, look, despite what is going on, what are the positives that we can take from this? What is it that President Mnangagwa has done to make sure that we break with the past? To
Apart
make
from
sure
speaking, what else has he done?
Well, there's a lot. I've already said that he's urging people, and of course, the Zimbabwe Republic Police falls under his administration. And he has said, arrest those that are acting criminally and unlawfully. The Zimbabwe Electoral Commission has issued a statement to the effect that you are acting unlawfully if you are taking or intimidating people to act in a certain way. So, and he's been doing several rounds internationally, regionally, and really promising. And look, he is the first president so far to say the United Nations must come and supervise our elections. The European Union must come. That is a very powerful statement to say we believe that we will have an election that is free, an election that is credible, and we are transparent about our systems and our processes. What more can you possibly ask for?
Honorable Maondera.
Yeah, first of all, Farai, I think it's regrettable that Honorable Mazisa is not aware that right in his constituents such an evil practice is happening. I've got relatives, both his constituents, my neighbor, Glenora, and his Highfield West. I've got relatives who stay in Highfield West, Ward 29, who have been telling me time and again that there's a center they call Zorro Center. They are asked to come with those slips as a precondition that to receive rice, which is donated by the government but is distributed by the MP. So I'm actually surprised that he's saying he's not aware, yet he's the one who distributes rice in Highfield West. And secondly, another dimension which is worrying, Farai, is the dimension of chiefs who are being used in this Dastard Act. Yes, we support that chiefs should get what is due to them. But my worry is, all along, these chiefs have not been getting their vehicles. Why now? Because we are getting to elections. It's because they want to use them to commit this crime. And some of these chiefs have been telling them that they must be very careful, that if they are used to commit crime, it's themselves that who stand in the court, in the dock, and be charged. So it's a very worrying trend that the chiefs are being used and all the traditional leaders. Yet the constitution is very clear. Section 2181, subsection 2, chiefs are supposed to be apolitical. And we are worried why now they're starting to buy chiefs' vehicles now.
Honorable Maondera, I'm sure if they were handed over 2 years ago, you'd have argued that, look, we are in a drought, we shouldn't be wasting time on vehicles and all. So I'm sure, there would have been an argument. But what is also, Mandla Mpofu at Alicedale Farm in Nyamandlovu gets in touch with us, and hopefully, I hope that ZECO officials are listening and can follow this up. ERC is here, and anyone else who is involved in this. He says, we are gathering tomorrow in Umguza District, Ward 14, to our councillor, who is named here, to present our serial numbers. And failure to do so, you risk losing your stand. That is Mandla Mpofu at Alicedale. Hopefully, this can be followed up so we can actually find out if indeed this is the situation on the ground, because I think what we need, as the listener says, let's move from circulars to actual action. But I think we can only do that if there's compelling evidence, which is what I'm saying.
And the evidence,
let's gather that.
The evidence keeps coming. It's there. Now, when you look at the question of human rights, because whatever is happening is clearly a direct violation of human rights, Zimbabweans must be protected by their government when their human rights are being violated. Which is why this entire matter has to be brought to the doorstep of the president. I think we have heard him speak about what his intentions are. He has not said he wants a partially free and a partially fair election, or a partially credible election. He said he wants a free, fair, and credible election. And I'll still insist, if all these things are happening, the police are not picking up the issues, there are no cases coming to court, then there's something wrong with the administration. Either the people are not reporting this to the right offices, or people are reporting this to the right offices and no action is being taken. But either way, we've got a president that has shown an interest in being a people's president. Can we expect the president at this very moment to go live on radio right now and say to the people of Zimbabwe, these acts have been brought to my attention, and with immediate effect I'm ordering 1, 2, 3, 4 things to happen,
very important,
so that this ends forthwith?
Yeah, but
if it is possible, and maybe asking for too much, because the administration is huge and there are a lot of responsibilities. But this is part of what we expect as part of the change that as Zimbabweans we want to see. Zimbabweans want to see a credible election, and regardless of who wins, and I need to insist that whoever wins an election, be it the opposition or ZANU-PF, they must win so on the basis of free, fair, and credible election processes. And any actions that are inconsistent with freeness and fairness and credibility must be dealt with. And here, finally, Farai, and I know the honorable member of parliament wants to come in. Finally, when you go to the code of conduct for political parties have the responsibility to educate their structures on what is right and what is wrong. Remember, I mentioned it. It's not just the supporters or structures who are liable. The parties themselves are bound. They have a responsibility. Are we seeing political parties educate their structures on what is a violation of the Electoral Act and what is not a violation of the Electoral Act? So that responsibility also comes to the political parties.
Let me ask you something, Tawanda, based on what you were just saying, that, you know, the president has expressed his desire, his vision of what he wants, and he's by saying that, he set that in motion. I want to, come from the angle that Honorable Maziwisa is coming from, where everything else, what if we've done everything else? We've brought in international observers, we've addressed issues of access to public media, we've answered all these questions and put in place all these reforms, but then is it not a likelihood where we will have whoever has lost coming back and saying, but my serial numbers are gatorwa? Yet it is just let me not call it a minor thing, but where everything else, I mean, we've got 95% correct.
Right.
And then just because of a small thing, we then say, it's not free and fair because of that.
That's exactly
when you're assessing elections, and I'll say this from my experience as an international observer in other African countries. So sitting in missions such as SADC and AU, I can tell you how these assessments are conducted. Now, it's fair and fine, and I know my brother who normally wants to debate this issue. It's fair and fine to say that you cannot expect a free and fair election, and we probably need another debate on this. But the material effect of some of the actions that happen prior to the election process may, and I'm not saying they will, may have a fundamental impact on how people express themselves in a ballot, right? So, if you are looking at the pre-election phase of the election cycle, where processes such as voter registration occur, you have to consider the context in which these processes were undertaken.
Yes.
Apart from discussing the qualitative elements around the registration process itself. So the quality of the voters roll is important, the quality of the voter education process is important, but the environment in which these election processes are being conducted is essential. Now, you can get away, and I'll insist on this, you can get away with having a very bad environment prior to the election, but everything else being perfect, and that election passing. You can. But just because certain observers have said it's fine, because what you are suggesting to have affected the election's credibility did not have a material impact on the overall process, you can get away with it. But ultimately, and I will take everyone back to the whole question of the Zimbabwean liberation struggle. People went to war for one man, one vote. And the anticipation back then was that, because a lot of us have relatives who are war veterans as well, The anticipation was that each person must be able to freely express themselves in a ballot. Not some people must be able to freely express themselves in the ballot. And if you use that as a measure, as a Zimbabwean, we must be able to come up with our own standards, which are not half measures. So we must be our own judges of our own election.
Yeah.
And I agree, we must not expect a very perfect situation.
Thank you.
We cannot argue or give excuses that an imperfect situation is therefore okay. We must.
No, I don't
Honorable
think, I
Mazwisa.
don't think that anybody is suggesting that at all. And I like the fact that you have raised a very important issue of putting whatever might be going on to a test. And you raised the issue of materiality. To what extent is factor A material to the legitimacy of an election? Yeah. And let's, for example, use this voter registration slip as an example. It is said or reported or alleged that people are having their slips taken away from them or recorded. I don't see how. Let's assume that that is correct and that is true and that this is actually happening. It's an assumption. It's not been proven anyway. Let's assume, however, that it's true. Hold on. Let's assume that it is true. It does not stop the registration or the registrant, the person who was registered as a voter, to actually participate in the voting process. So we are talking about the materiality aspect. So, however, having said that, I think what is going on, I think we've condemned it. Coming from ZANU-PF, we condemn that. We don't feel that that is something that should continue, especially in the new dispensation, especially in circumstances where the president has been very clear consistently that we want to have an election that is free, fair, and credible. But I think, look, the beautiful thing about Zimbabwe is that Zimbabwe is a highly educated society. The people of Zimbabwe can read in between the lines and see whether certain concerns and certain allegations that are being raised are really being raised either genuinely or they're being raised for purposes of hiding behind unpreparedness. And this is happening. You see, we are approaching an election, and there's overwhelming evidence, if you like, to suggest that certain political parties, which I'm not going to name, but certain political parties are simply unprepared financially, in terms of mobilization, and so on, a whole host of reasons to participate in the forthcoming election. And what are they going to do? Naturally, those political parties are going to clutch at straws and raise all manner of allegations to try and taint the legitimacy of an election. I'm saying that is not in the national interest.
Yeah.
Before you come in, I just want to read a couple of more messages. Program belongs to the listeners, and we want to take as many of their contributions as possible. Chris Doda says, my take on the forthcoming elections on the basis of what President ED has been saying is that the elections will likely be free of naked violence, but intimidation will win the day. The challenge is that these parties are steeped in zero-sum political games. Winner takes all. They are in it for political power retention instead of putting Zimbabwe first. I encourage Zimbabweans to shun and report any form of intimidation. Thank you so much. Honorable Mazwisa, maybe you can respond to this. Honorable Mazwisa should be reminded that his party's government had in the past banned voter education by civic organizations, allowing only the Registrar General's office to do so. I'm not sure if that's true. We can shed more light as we go on the discussion. No wonder the average voter is somewhat ignorant and fearful. Please just take note of that. I'll ask you to respond, and maybe Tawanda can also help us on that. In as much as intimidation of voters is concerned, I really condemn these actions, but I believe this voter privacy violation is an angle that opposition are taking to tarnish the election result, because it is a fact that the opposition is losing this election. Mr. Piri says, last year in November, people were asked to produce serial numbers of their voter registration slips in Zadobe constituency, that's what it said here, in Matobo district, an area where people are resettled during land reform. NN says, tell us about vanhu vari kukorokodza kumamusha uko for rallies using intimidation. The ruling party has a very bad reputation panyaya iyi. If they really mean it, they should effectively act on this matter. We should see people being arrested. Why is it always that election time in Zimbabwe is a time of agony, violence, intimidation, and counter accusations? The ruling party must walk the talk. Panyayema slips, because denying it will not do them any good. That is Waswin Mutare. Shingise asks, what if it is the opposition who are demanding slips and making it look as if it's the ruling party? And here's another one in the same vein saying, how sure are you kuti izanu kokana iri opposition iri kudaro kuti isvibise zita raED Mnangagwa? Last Nyamashisha, I'll take this last before I hand over back to the panel. Last week Thursday in plots at Cold Comfort, two people with clearly with ruling party logo t-shirts were going around taking serial numbers and names. I confronted them saying it's illegal. They told me it's a party HQ orders that they do that. Honorable Mountain, and then to you, Honorable Mazwisa.
I just want to dispel the misconception by my colleague that certain parties are not prepared. We are prepared, and to tell you the truth, Farai, if we are going to go for an election even tomorrow, ZANU-PF is going to the dustbin of history. Because look, ED is their candidate, President Mnangagwa. He was beaten twice by Blessing Chebundo, who's just but a minor. What if he is going to contest with Morgan Changrai? I tell you, there will be history. So to say we are trying to tarnish their image and because they are not prepared, it's out of question. Because they know within their hearts of us that as a party we are prepared. And there was this rumor that they wanted to extend the elections. And you said, no, elections must be held as and when they are due. Because they are not prepared themselves.
Honorable Maundera, let me just chip in with a point. This is just a point, my personal opinion, where I'm very worried that we are talking about where you base and talking about personalities as opposed. So you are talking about an individual against another individual and not about your policies being better than. So I think we need to move. That's just my own observation.
I just wanted to clear the air on preparedness. Let's not talk about preparedness.
Okay.
Let's talk about voter intimidation.
True.
And just to buttress the point by Tawanda, the president, the buck stops with him. What stops him to summon his Commissioner General of the Police and order them to investigate? Evidence itself is sufficient for investigation so that they can bring people to court. Why?
Honorable Mazwisa, please respond.
Look, it's very clear and evident that the dynamics have changed since the so-called Chabundo thing. You can think of Chabundo and talk about it all you want, but you risk running the real danger of facing a candidate who is now clearly a people's president and whose support cuts across all the political spheres of this country. There's a claim that has come from one of the statements that you've been reading. That number one, that ZANU-PF has a reputation of intimidation, and that there's something, I think somebody said something about
voter education,
and that we used to do something in the past. Look, we are not living in the past anymore. This is a new dispensation. That is why I think we have been emphasizing on the fact that this is a new dispensation. And we don't just emphasize this to members of the opposition or to the general public. We are emphasizing this even to members of ZANU-PF. That if you had a certain way of thinking, a certain way of doing things, because we are now in a new dispensation, it's imperative. It's absolutely obligatory on everyone that we change the way we do things. We change the way we look at things, specifically and primarily because we have a president who wants to do things differently. Now, we don't belong in the past anymore. Anybody who chooses to do that, that is their own will. And it will be regrettable if you are actually a member of ZANU-PF. We want to do things differently, and we have a president who is determined to do things differently. We need to support him, and that's what we are doing as ZANU-PF.
I think Tawanda raised a good point, and certainly I'll take it upon perhaps you Honorable Mazwisa, as a part of the member of the ruling party, but also as our MPs to say, look, if the president indeed has said this is what he wants, Tawanda said the buck stops with him. So let's take to him this evidence. All these people are getting in touch with us here and saying, we've been asked to do this, I've seen this, and say, Mr. President, here you go. You have said you want a free and fair election. This is what the people are doing. What are you going to do about it?
And definitely, one of the things that we're doing, the president has said every Zimbabwean must contribute to making this country a better place. And we have been reaching out to the president and sharing this information with him to say, look, this is what's there. To operationalize what you have stated as a matter of principle, these are the things that need to happen. Number one, Parliament, and my colleagues here, I have no kind words for you. Parliament must strengthen laws. If you have laws that are weak, you leave a lot of discretion to people in authority, and this is making Zimbabweans vulnerable. You have to do your job, and this is across the political divide. If we are sincere, let's see Parliament begin to align laws, begin to strengthen laws ahead of elections. We've got a very small window of opportunity. And how effectively we use the time that's left to make sure that we legislate, we make laws that make Zimbabweans safer. It's a legacy that you have an opportunity to create for yourselves. Why must you be that parliament that people will say you failed to fully align all the laws with the new constitution? Because you are this new parliament, this one parliament that had this rare opportunity to do this. And this cuts across the political divide. If you want people to vote for you across the political divide, tell them what you have done to make our legal framework better than it was, to align it. And these are the questions that I hope voters will be asking these legislators when they come back to campaign. What have you done? But there was two issues that I would want to respond to. Number one, regardless of which political party is doing this, it's a criminal offense. And all political parties are liable. Where this has happened, let's see political parties take action against their own members if they're doing it. And that is a show of goodwill. And it's across the political divide. Whatever acts, because we're only talking about this kind of intimidation, because there's voter registration. There are other things that are happening that are in blatant violation of the Electoral Act. Why do we allow them? Are we taking action against our own structures to do this? Then finally, Honorable Mazisa mentions the material effect of what is happening now at the polls. Now, I know you mentioned that we must not dwell in the past. And I'll be very cautious about how I'm going to frame my statement. But there's what's called the margin of terror in determining how people exercise their right to vote. Now, for you to adequately understand the dynamics that we have been receiving from communities, the current levels of alleged intimidation are associated with massive misinformation, false voter education in communities where people are being told that because it's biometric voter registration and we have taken your pictures and we have taken your fingerprints, we are now going to be able to know how you voted. Now, we've got a high literacy rate in Zimbabwe. But the sad reality is that part of our history has also been a history where some people alleged to have voted incorrectly have suffered some consequences. It's an unfortunate history. I would not want to dwell on that. But the sad reality is that without that being adequately addressed in the past, it's a constant reminder to an ordinary and vulnerable voter that all this information that has now been collected can be used against me in future. And that affects how a person then casts their vote 6 months down the line. So, and part of what must also happen, because mind you, giving out false information in terms of voter education is also an offense. So if party structures across the political divide, if you guys from MDC and from ZANU, your structures are giving false information to people, you're in violation of the Electoral Code of Conduct. And it must stop. Yes. And this is part of what you must also deal with. So you cannot just stop at saying, let's stop the collection of these serial numbers. We must stop all the other actions that are associated with the intimidation that is happening in communities, so that that entire infrastructure is dismantled. And indeed, it's a collective effort. I think there are ways in which people can begin to coordinate and talk about these things in all sincerity and begin to seriously deal with them.
Honorable Mondre, before you say what you're going to say, I then just want to again ask this. For the people, so many people getting in touch. I think I've got about 10 people who are getting in touch and saying, kuno kwakati, this is what's happening. Where do the people go with this evidence? Because perhaps it's going to the wrong places or they're reporting to the wrong people. Where do people go with this if they want it to be acted and for it to come to light and to prove that indeed it's happening?
They should report to the police, because they're the law enforcement agencies. And if there's no joy, they can approach the organizations such as Tawanda's ERAC who are assisting. There's ZESNI, so many organizations that we can assist. But primarily they must go to the police because it's a criminal offense. The police are tasked with investigating and arresting perpetrators and bring them to court. So I think it's very important. Farai, it's very important. My colleague has been talking about a new dispensation. If there's a new dispensation, it must be new, not to try to be new. We don't want people to end up having an impression that this is a dispensation which is trying to be new. The driver, the bus is still the same, but it's only the driver that has changed. That's the impression people end up having, or the perception that they end up having, because what they've been seeing in the previous era is being perpetrated in every sphere. And someone will be clamoring new dispensation, new. If it's a new dispensation, it should be truly be new in character, new in everything. But it's not what we are seeing on the ground, because it's now 60 days into this new dispensation, the so-called dispensation. But what we have seen in the ground is just the talk show, a lot of talking and no action on the ground.
Listeners getting in touch. Someone here says, will ZANU-PF reform itself out of power? Honorable Maziwisa, I think you're trying to hide behind the finger, trying to tell us this is a new dispensation. Someone else here says, the problem with Zimbabwe is that people like the police, judges, and all those who are supposed to play neutral in Zimbabwe belong to the ruling party, and there will never be free and fair elections because those people were once beaten in 2008. How can we believe that they are now those people once beat us in 2008? How can we believe they are now neutral? Because ZANU-PF did not change, only the president changed. That's Tafadzwa Kushurugi. Thank you so much. A last one I want to read here before I think I ask a pertinent question. Charles in Harare says, let it be known that the MDC has started building castles in the air. How can Trump promise to give them 15 billion if MDC wins, yet the US Senate blocked US spending budget? Zimbabweans united, we now see clearly. Some time ago, MDC attacked phone dealers by Zimex, and they are now doing sabotage by collecting voter registration slips. Charles Narai, thank you so much. What is worrying for me here is we are already seeing, you said this, it's the accusations, counter accusations, which is very counterproductive in my view, because it's now saying, no, it's those guys trying to tarnish our image. It's the history, it's, so how do we move forward as our MPs? How do we ensure that we have the right environment to go into where we're not pointing fingers at each other, we're not hurling insults at each other, that we actually have an election whose outcome we will respect and will move forward from?
There's only one way we can move forward from this, and that is to make sure that in whatever we do, in our various political parties, whatever we do must have the national interest at heart. It must be something that breaks with the past. It must be something at all material times that is consistent, I think, with what the Honorable President is trying to do. And that is to lure investment, that is to make sure that the next government has legitimacy, whoever forms that next government. It is to ensure that in our different political parties, the contest, the debates, the arguments that we should have are philosophical, intellectual arguments. They're not arguments around intimidation, around violence, around wanting to be in power at all cost. We must at all times, particularly in this new dispensation, make sure that whatever we do, number one, is in the national interest. Number two, we have an intellectual debate. Who at best advances the best idea that takes Zimbabwe forward? That is what the kind of debate we should have. We should not ascribe, blame to each other. That's not progressive. It is archaic. It is primitive. It doesn't advance any political party. It certainly doesn't advance the best interests of the nation. Let's have philosophical debates. Let's allow the people of Zimbabwe to choose. Let's have an election that is free, fair, and credible. And I think that there's a lot of political will on the part of the new administration to make sure that that actually happens. We are the only African country in recent history that has extended an invitation to the United Nations. This is what the opposition has been asking for. The president has said, let us do it for purpose of ensuring transparency. I think that is a great move, a positive move in the right direction. Let us make sure, all of us in our different spheres, and make sure that whatever we do, whatever little petty differences we might have, ultimately the person or the people that benefit are the Zimbabwean people.
Honorable Mandela, just want to pick up on this invitation to international observers who haven't been here for, close to 2 decades now. Do you not see that as a commitment to say, look, our hands, the president saying my hands are clean, I have nothing to hide, so the whole world can come and see? Do you not think that there's some sincerity in that?
If these international observers are coming, we hear all that. But before they come, already we have got a problem and this problem is got a potential to taint the election, like I said in the beginning. As you have got that problem on the table, why can't you deal with it now? These observers will come later on, and meanwhile the house is burning.
Which problem specifically are you talking about?
This intimidation and the taking of voter slips and serial numbers. It is so. If there's willingness to deal with the problem, we raised that issue last week in Parliament through the Minister of Justice, Honorable Ziambi, and he promised that he's going to look into the matter. And we think they should move the speed to deal with this problem if they are sincere. And I was hoping that by this week we should not be seeing any people moving around taking people's voter slips, but conversely, people are on the ground and they are continuing with that evil act of taking people's slips.
So from what you are saying, you have presented your case, and when you go to Parliament next week, I believe it is, you are now going to be taking the Justice Minister on and saying, where are we?
Exactly. And
if there's no progress and if these things continue, then what?
Then we have indicated that we have raised it in Parliament, like I said in the beginning. You see, we get worried. We are raising a pertinent point in Parliament that voter slips are being taken. Then you see your colleagues from the other side, specifically from ZANU-PF, they are howling and growing that, don't talk about it. I mean, what does that indicate? It shows that somehow, they know about it, they don't know how to talk about it, or else they're just ignorant about what's going on in their constituencies. But the truth of the matter is, if there's no action by next week, I think the world would have known that these are the people who indicate right and they're turning left.
But more importantly, what will you then do as the opposition?
As opposition, we will continue to educate our supporters and Zimbabweans at large to say, please don't cooperate with people who are moving around collecting voter slips and taking away serial numbers. And we will also be forced to go to court. My Secretary General has hinted to say if this continues, we will be forced to approach the courts with that problem so that everything is sorted out.
Tawanda, parting shot, finally, I mean, we've spoken about observers. I suppose we could get observers from Mars, but, that doesn't guarantee an election. What needs to be done, what best needs to be done for us to be able to achieve, can we achieve, rather, a free, fair, credible, transparent election within the time frame?
It is always possible. It comes down to how effectively we use the limited time that's left. So on the question of observers, just a quick parting shot. The invitation of observers is very welcome. They are welcome. I think the more eyes we have watching our elections, the better. But we need to create the necessary infrastructure that allows for the early deployment of these observers, the early invitation of these observers. We need to also sort out our electoral act. You see, the what is called an accreditation committee that ZEC runs, which must have the responsibility of having these observers come, in our view, must be an independent committee, purely controlled by the Election Commission. Sadly, our current electoral act allows the executive to sit within that, which compromises the independence of the Election Commission. So, as legislators, I hope this is one of the elements that you guys are going to be looking at. Let's strengthen the independence of the Commission so that even the coming in of these observers is not necessarily just at the mercy of the president, but it's something that we institutionalize. Zimbabwe must be that one country that is able to say, let observers come because we've got nothing to hide. So that's one element that we must look at. We are all interested in having credible elections, and we must support what the president has said, that these elections must be free and fair. But for them to be free and fair, we must be prepared to invest in such freeness and fairness. And a lot of the work must happen now. Either in Parliament in terms of the laws, at the Election Commission in terms of administration, and in the political environment in terms of how political parties interact with Zimbabweans ahead of the next election.
Last message here saying, Honorable Maziwise, endai pa ZTV neve mapato mamwe yese mutaure zvinyaya iyi nyika yese inzwe. So I think the key thing here that I think to take home is, let's spread this word, ensure it's getting there, and ensure that perhaps unfortunately some of these people who are perpetrating these acts are doing it thinking that they are impressing their superiors kuti isuchi muri kuona kuno kuti rukushanda turikuvhundutsira vanhu turikutora manhambe. So they need to be disabused of that and told that no, in fact you are not impressing or doing a good job, you're actually compromising the process. Very, very quickly, because we have 30 seconds left, Honorable Mazisa.
We might come from diverse political parties, but I think all of us are united in our desire to see Zimbabwe prosper. It's very important that we recognize and realize that the legitimacy of the next election is a sine qua non. It's a requirement for prosperity in Zimbabwe. Let us not disturb that. Let us all work in a way that is consistent with the vision of the President of the day.
Indeed. Thank you so much. And on that note, we must end this discussion. I want to thank my two guests, Honorable Psychology Mazwisa, Honorable Maondera, Tanda Shimini. Thank you so much for coming through. Thank you so much to all the listeners who tuned in, and most importantly, those who got in touch with us. And I do urge all those who've been getting in touch with me saying this is happening here, this has happened there, please take that information to the police and to the other authorities so that we can get action and stamp this out ahead of these elections. My name is Farai Mwakutuya. You've been listening to Ask the MP. It's only on ZFM Stereo, my station, your station. Thank you so much for tuning in and for choosing us. Have a wonderful evening and keep it here for the rest of your evening's entertainment. Good night.
Southern African Parliamentary Support Trust promotes civic and public participation in parliament business in Zimbabwe and across the SADC region. SAP's quest is to strengthen parliaments to become truly central institutions in a democracy. The work of parliaments should promote good governance, that is, how public institutions conduct public affairs and manage resources in order to guarantee the realization of human rights. A strong parliament will promote representative democracy. For more information on the Southern African Parliamentary Support Trust, visit www.sapst.org.